Okay, welcome along everyone to Live on Air this Sunday evening, the 12th of February 2017. We're kicking off again for our work for the Trinity Waiake eLearning Centre and Kiwi Connection, which sort of services the whole thing. Welcome to this particular broadcast, Peter Davies and David Erasmus. I've known both of these guys for quite a long time indeed, but they have one common area that interests me a very great deal, and that is that they're both highly trained and capable mathematicians. So tonight's topic is about living a life in mathematics, and I thought I'd get each of them to sort of briefly introduce themselves by saying where they studied mathematics first of all. So maybe Peter Davies, could we start with you, please?
Yes, David, thank you. I looking at the camera, very good. I effectively have mathematics is my career. I'm an actuary by profession. After my children are nearly, one of them is in their 30s, they still don't actually know what I do for a living. But I'll just briefly explain that I'm effectively an insurance mathematician. So every insurance company you come across will have an actuary. Some of them have a lot of actuaries. The bigger ones will have many. The smaller ones may use a consultant. I'm an external actuary to probably 20 or so of New Zealand smaller insurance companies, and they all by law have to have an actuary so that their premiums and their reserving is sound, so they can all pay their claims. Maths was one of my favourite subjects at school, and then I trained at the University of Cape Town, doing a degree in actuarial science, which had a very strong maths and statistics base. And then I did professional exams after that. You do the professional exams through one of the professional bodies. I did mine through the London Institute. And then so qualified as an actuary through the Institute of Actuaries in London. And it's a very good career. It's a very good way of making a career in mathematics.
Peter, I didn't know that at the University of Cape Town, and I guess that this must be the case in numerous universities, that you could actually do your first degree in actuarial science.
Yes, there are a number of universities around the world who work closely with the examining bodies. So the University of Cape Town invested some significant time and effort in linking a particular course. It was through the Faculty of Commerce with the Institute of Actuaries in London. They made sure the syllabus was in line with the UK professional syllabus. And the deal was that if you passed particular subjects with an upper second or above, then you could get exempted from some of the initial professional exams. We all still had to do the final professional exams, but by doing a degree, you could cover the initial technical subjects. And there's I think 3 universities in Australia who do that. They've linked up with the Australian Professional Institute. So yeah, it's a very good way of reducing the length of time of part-time study that you have to do by combining it with your university studies.
Right, that's fascinating. That's a great introduction. David Erasmus, you too have made a career out of mathematics. Where did you study?
Coincidentally, from the same university, also University of Cape Town in South Africa. I grew up partly in the UK, partly in South Africa, and I've spent the last 20 years in New Zealand. My direction was more pure mathematics. The University of Cape Town pure mathematics has a bit of a focus on topology, which is rather fun. For myself, though, I particularly like things like calculus, analysis, computer graphics, and that kind of thing. And I've basically spent a large part of my life focusing on those topics as I developed software for simulating models and teaching mathematics.
But the two of you have got this incredibly rich background that uses the mathematics that you studied at university in your everyday working lives. So I'm picking from that you both still continue to enjoy the subject of mathematics as a whole, even though you're focused in very particular areas. Do you still like mathematics?
Briefly, I don't know if it's a Chinese proverb, but along the lines of if you do a job you enjoy, you'll never work another day in your life. I'm very much in that category. So yes.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, and I think I'd echo that. I really enjoy what I do. I don't like everything in mathematics. In fact, things like statistical analysis don't excite me particularly, number crunching. But there's a lot of things in mathematics I really love and enjoy doing.
Okay, both of you have also got really interesting stories to tell about a kind of emphasis on education, and somehow your mathematics got you involved in different sorts of educational activities. But Peter, you started what is one of the most successful private schools in New Zealand. This, when I first got to know you, you had just a couple of years before got a prefabricated classroom onto a site in what was then rural Albany. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about that story? Because it's quite fascinating.
Oh, I didn't think you were going to bring that up. Anyway, yes, if I just go back a step, I was very fortunate to go to a very, very good school in Johannesburg. It was a church school. We were poor, but we went by virtue of my father being an Anglican minister. It was a school founded very much on people who had no desire to be wealthy, but who gave their lives to build up the school. And it's a magnificent school on Houghton Ridge, if anybody knows Johannesburg. And I, coupled with that upbringing and a desire to see the best education for my children, when we got to Auckland, we basically set up a pioneer school, and it had to be on a non-profit basis. So everything about it has been non-profit. Everyone who involved in the board is a volunteer, and yes, so it's grown from. It started with 34 children, and it's up to about 800 students now. But yeah, so that really came from a combination of two things: wanting to deliver have a facility that delivered the values and education that I had been privileged to enjoy, and to give some sort of legacy back in a different sort of way. You know, for all the luxuries we've had none of the hardships that the Christian Brothers of. It was the Community of the Resurrection was the name of the community who basically started the school, and yeah, that's the story there.
It's a magnificent achievement in terms of what you've done within Auckland, New Zealand. David, you've got an equally interesting tale as a sort of a peripatetic mathematician. Did I pronounce that incorrectly? I'm not sure of it. You are sort of like you decided to go wandering, I think, after you graduated.
Well, I can actually tell you quite a similar story. I was asked by some nuns running a church school in Soweto in South Africa. They had the situation that they wanted to teach mathematics, but they had no maths teachers, nobody qualified to teach mathematics. So they'd been donated all these computers by IBM, and they asked if I could help. So I developed some software for them to try to excite children with simulations and animation and stuff like that in it, to try to get the students enthusiastic about mathematics. which worked so well that a few years later, some of those students took part in maths Olympiads and did very well in the end. I did it on the basis that I would do it freely for them if I could sell the software outside. And that's, of course, been financially very lucrative for me because that mathematics software I developed has been sold around the world.
Right. Your program, suite of programs, I guess, for teaching children number skills, is it? At a, what, about
Well,
five?
it's quite, it does the full range of mathematics, right up to things like calculus, analysis, integration, that kind of thing.
Wow. You taught mathematics. Did you teach it in a high school, or you taught some other things as well?
Yes, actually, I was wondering if you're going to ask that. I did teach mathematics a little. But I taught physics a lot more. My personal feeling is it's hard to teach a subject that you really love and know very well. But it's sometimes better to teach a subject you know slightly less well than like physics. So I think I was a more successful physics teacher than mathematics teacher because I made fewer assumptions talking to the students.
That's a really interesting observation. Does that ring any bells with you, Peter Davies?
Not really. I have lectured from time to time. Maybe for the reasons David's outlined. I wasn't a good lecturer. I find it difficult to slow down the pace and appreciate how long it takes everyone, including me, to absorb new facts. And yes, but teachers have to move very carefully and continually check that their students are grasping each step of the way. And I had difficulty with, because once I understand something, I go at breakneck speed in my thoughts. But to teach that concept to someone else, you have to slow it down by a factor of 100. And I have difficulty with, my brain has difficulty doing that. So teaching is a very special skill. My wife teaches new entrants or junior, teaches in the junior primary school, and the patience and skill to teach that level is just phenomenal. But I was not a good teacher of university students studying financial mathematics, so my chance of surviving in the primary school would be zero.
One of the things, because I taught maths in high school for a few years, 5 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, and
Okay.
what it did for me was confirm that I wanted to somehow base my life on mathematics because I'd been so grasped, excited by some of the things that I'd learnt that I did want to communicate those ideas to others. But perhaps a little bit like David Erasmus, and maybe a little bit like you, Peter, I didn't find it all that easy to, because maths is compulsory in the curriculum, I didn't necessarily find it all that easy to get some concepts across at all levels, from the junior high school to the senior. And I did try my hand a little bit at teaching physics, which was an absolute disaster because I'm not a physicist. That's the reality. Probably the thing that I enjoyed teaching the most was art, which I did for a term when a particular high school didn't have an art teacher for what was regarded as the most difficult class of, they were then Form 4 boys. They had very little academic skill. And that was the kind of turning point at which I realized something that David Erasmus had said, that because I wasn't an artist and I had no training in art or design or anything like that, but I did want to somehow communicate a skill and an enthusiasm to those kids. And it was the fact that I didn't have any knowledge whatsoever that enabled some really good interaction to take place. And I wonder, for both of you, we've all done high-level mathematics. Is there one subject area that interests you and excites you?
For me, David was fortunate that he could handle and enjoy pure mathematics. I struggled with the pure mathematics. I really, really enjoyed anything to do with programming. So more the sort of, and I guess in my work, probability. So probability in terms of applying concepts in my work, and programming, which isn't really mathematics, but it's kind of an extension of the logical, train of thought, and working with logic. That was what I enjoyed the most, I would say. But from second year onwards, I struggled with the more theoretical side of pure maths. I loved calculus too, by the way.
Yes, and for myself, I'd say the same. Things that I didn't like would be things like statistics and that kind of thing, number crunching. I think the solution to the, what's that called, the four-color map, the current map, I think is a dreadful solution. There's too much involved with number crunching. I like pure mathematics. I like notation. I love things like calculus, the notation of partial differential equations, integrals, that kind of thing.
I struggled more with complex analysis than real analysis. I really enjoyed the kinds of theorems that were generated on the real number line. But I suppose that the area that I most enjoyed was actually in philosophy, where we were doing the meta theory of mathematics, the sort of Bertrand Russell kind of thing, how do you make mathematics? I think the crucial theorem that I learned and certainly had to reproduce in exams was the proposition that not every well-formed formula is provable. And I think in foundations of mathematics, that is one of the most significant theorems that came out of the 20th century. And it was actually around about the time that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics was getting really developed in the late 20s, early 30s. So that's the area for me, mathematical logic, I suppose. But when it came to trying to explain it to my daughters, they really weren't very interested. And I found that very few people were interested. And I wonder whether there's a kind of a parallel there to Christian faith. Sometimes I'd be really interested in what you guys have got to say about this. Sometimes when I'm talking about Christian faith, I've got my thoughts race ahead because I've got a bit of background knowledge in it, and I get the impression perhaps that other people don't get on board as quickly. Well, how's it for you? Because both of you have what I'd call a spiritual outlook on life. Does mathematics somehow impinge on that? And how do you communicate it?
You go first, David.
Oh, okay, right. I don't know how easy that is to answer. I think what I would say is, having a strong feeling for mathematics might be represented by a belief in a universal truth rather than opinion. I'd say one big difference between mathematics, certainly mathematics is based on a number of assumptions, of course, but the idea is that there is a universal single answer to any question, which would seem to be almost a religious perspective and very different from any other subject. I don't know what you think about that.
I've got to spend some time thinking about that. Peter, what about for you? Is mathematics in any way got a kind of a spiritual component for you?
As far as mathematics goes and my involvement with it, I'm quite a fundamentalist. I like you described how interesting you found a particular hypothesis. To me, I enjoy mathematics for the ultimate absolute answers that it produces. And in that regard, David referred to integration. Integration is a part of calculus where you're sort of effectively working backwards using a variety of techniques, some of which are quite complex, using the square root of -1 to solve a differential equation or something. A lot of these you can verify by going back the other way. So you can verify an integration by then differentiating. So a lot of my work can always be cross-checked. All my programming work can always be cross-checked. So I'm very deterministic in my mathematical field and not at all the maths itself to me isn't spiritual. What maths gives to me is tools to address practical problems. But in that regard, for example, if I just use one example of the theory of creation versus evolution, there's a theorem called the infinite monkey theorem, which you may have heard of, where, however you want to express it, the theory goes along the lines of if you put 1 million monkeys and let them tap away at 1 million computers for 1 million years, all the great works of Shakespeare will be written. And that kind of is where some evolutionists come from. The argument that because life is always changing and you put millions of years in front of it, anything is explainable as a sort of a random outcome. But I'm just mentioning this as one example, what that million monkey theorem tells you is that that's rubbish. You can work out deterministically that if you did put 1 million monkeys on 1 million typewriters for 1 million years and they actually typed all the time and didn't take 5-minute monkey smoke breaks or what have you, you might get one twinkle twinkle little star, just those words twinkle twinkle little star with no spaces. If you introduce spaces, it becomes even more impossible. So what that gives you is a sort of a tool for realizing that there's nothing random about evolution, that the complexity of what's evolved can't have happened randomly. There's been whatever form life arrived on Earth at, it didn't start here just from an accident. It came here from somewhere and it has a purpose. And that it's too complex to have come here by random. And I guess you could say that's one example of my thinking of what probability teaches you, is when people say things like 1 million monkeys on 1 million typewriters will write all the works of Shakespeare. That that's false, and it's absolutely impossibly false. And the same goes for the complexity of life. So that's just one example.
It's an interesting example. I did a little video on this very thing a few months ago, and Richard Dawkins had tried to say, a long time ago, back when he wrote The Blind Watchmaker, so that's, I think, about 30 plus years ago, The Selfish Gene, sorry, what he tried to say was that, well, if you had essentially not a universe, but multiple universes, an infinite number of universes, then you would get it. And what he did was use a phrase. He said, this is the means of dissolving astronomically impossible odds. And of course, I think you're much more on the right track. You can't dissolve these astronomically impossible odds. But Dawkins and that sort of neo-Darwinist approach, I think, does try to subvert what I think are fairly sound mathematical principles. And in opposition to Dawkins, the great cosmologist Fred Hoyle, who was the proponent of the steady state theory in the 50s, 60s, I guess, he wanted also to dissolve those astronomical odds. And so he proposed a continuous creation out of nothing. And when eventually the evidence, scientific evidence, stacked up more towards a particular beginning, a big bang, a moment in time, as it were, Hoyle looked at what are called the cosmological constants, and when he looked at all of the cosmological constants, he arrived at the conclusion that this could not have been the result of mere chance. And he gave a famous quotation. I'm not going to try and quote it exactly, but it went along the lines that all the evidence stacks up for the evidence of some kind of mind or purpose at work. And that was a major shift for one of the stars of the evolving universe theories. David, you studied some of this quite a few years ago at a symposium in Oxford or Cambridge.
It was a course at Oxford, very enjoyable, but tough. We did 2 weeks of a philosophy course, which basically constructed all the basic philosophical theory and went into quite deep things about God and the existence and that kind of thing. Started very basic things and built up right up to things like the philosophical implications of things like Einstein's theory of relativity. And although I've sort of made my way carefully through the mathematics of his theory, I'd never actually thought about the philosophical implications. And it was a very tough course and quite interesting, very mind-stretching, I could say, and introduced me to a lot of topics I hadn't thought about before, in terms of quite similar things about the probability, about the universe being accidental and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
From my perspective, yes, I'm quite sure that some entity, God for want of a better word, that we don't understand, and the more that, and I love reading science and I read a lot of scientific journals on genetic, just advances in medicine. Everything we learn makes it clear just how more complex everything is than we previously understood. I think there's a Greek proverb about the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So no, it's certainly having an analytical mind and ability to understand probabilities has helped me become certain that we're just not a random accident here.
Yes, and I think if you would like me to follow on, David, I'd say that similarly, I would say that thinking about things like that is definitely influenced by your mathematical logic. And I think that's something which I wish a little bit more was taught in schools, mathematical logic, probabilities and things like that, in a way which is understandable so people can relate to questions like that.
If in both of your instances, then maths has ended up strengthening your faith? Do you think you would have had a weaker faith belief if you hadn't had mathematics as a background?
Hard to say. Possibly.
I think inquiring maths is just part of the inquiring mind. I was interested that you taught art, David. I'm impressed. For me, everything I've found interesting has been analytical, and certainly an analytical approach to not just maths, but to history, to biology, to physics, to chemistry, to evolution. all lead you down a path to a purpose in life.
Right. Peter, I taught just one fraction of a class for one fraction of a time, the art, but it did have a profound effect. Mathematics has certainly strengthened my faith, and I would even go so far as to say my view of mathematics is what the philosophers and foundational mathematicians would call the Platonic view. I believe in Plato's theory of ideal forms in the universe, and I don't believe it in quite the same way that Plato was on about, but I do think that mathematics is as close as you can possibly get to an expression of what God might be on about. So there are a couple of books on my shelves, Is God a Mathematician? Done by some very lively physicists and mathematicians. The last question I'd like to ask you is related, and it is, both of you are extremely talented musicians. Just tell us something about your your instruments and what you do.
You go first, David.
All right. I'm a self-taught player of an instrument called the balalaika. It's a Russian three-stringed instrument. And when I taught myself to play it in South Africa, there wasn't one available. So I had to make one with very sparse information. And one of the things I found interesting when I was making it is that, of course, the frets are placed according to a logarithmic scale. So this is one of the many instances in my life where I found that magically mathematics was a toolbox which provided the answers to the questions I had. It helped me space the frets correctly on the neck of the balalaika that I made.
You've busked your way around the world on that balalaika, haven't you?
Indeed, that was a wonderful experience. Yes, traveled around Europe playing the balalaika. We did extremely well and enjoyed it enormously.
You are pretty ably supported by your good lady.
Yes, Lorinda, my wife, playing, yes. Mm.
Peter, when I first went to Trinity at Waiake, I think within the first 6 months of discovering your talents, did we have you playing one of the, was it the Beethoven Appassionata? I can't remember, but you certainly did it at one of our fundraising dinners for the new building, and it was absolutely superb. You're a talented singer and piano player.
Well, just I would say that in the actuarial profession, it is well known that there's a common link between mathematical ability, a love of maths, and a love of music, and some musical ability. From a young age, I sang in my father's choir and always enjoyed it. I also did piano lessons, so got my grade 8 at school. But of the two, I've got a brother who really is talented at both. He can improvise, he can sight read. I love singing. I always have, always will. 4-part harmony with the melody, the odd change of key is just so uplifting, spiritually, personally, everything. Piano, I was more a technician rather than a talented person, I would say. It was very kind. Your very kind comments. Thank you, David.
Well, last question before the wrap up. I'm curious to know if you could possibly name a favorite composer, who would that be?
Schubert. Chopin. Chopin.
Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky. Schubert must be somewhere in there. And for me, Bruckner.
I'll go with Chopin.
Okay, you're going with Chopin. You're going with Tchaikovsky. And for me, it's sort of Bruckner, Mahler, probably Shostakovich. So
right.
maybe our musical, we're drawn to music that somehow reflects the areas of mathematics that interested us. I don't know. May I say, on behalf of the congregation at Trinity at Waiake, the group that run the e-learning centre, how very appreciative we all are of your coming into this first live on air for 2017. It's been an absolute privilege to be able to talk to the two of you. And I'll say at this point, thank you very much and good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David. Thanks.